All right, Daniel. We're in chapter 1. We're still dealing with verse 3, 4, and 5, 6, and 7. And here's the way it reads. And the king spake unto the Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skilled in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach, and the learning and the tongue of the jaw of men. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among them were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name Belshazzar, and to Hananiah, Shadrach, and to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. Okay. We dealt with the other scriptures. We got down to the portion where it was talking about the king's meat, and the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank. Now, we talked about how highly religious Babylon was. We talked about all of the kings all of the gods that they worshipped there, and how that the king represented the god. He was considered to be the god Bel, in human flesh, and so forth and so on. He was a religious leader of the society. He was the one in whom, you think, well, okay, this is kind of a privilege, to have the king say that we're going to feed you from the king's table, But the problem with all of that, food coming from the king's table, was sacrificed to all these Babylonian gods. I heard the other day, and I believe it was, and there was a good couple of fast food restaurants, but I heard the other day that here in the United States that the Muslims were pressuring, and I believe it was Burger King and McDonald's, for pressuring them to start using meat, halal certified meat in their burgers. So, well, that halal meat is meat that is in a sense that is offered to halal to Allah. In other words, what they do is they turn the animal that they're going to slaughter towards Mecca, and they pronounce the Shahada over them, the name of Allah, and so forth. And so they're offering that meat, they're sanctifying that meat in that way. But I think these two restaurants turned them down. I think they refused to do that. Now, maybe, it may not be, I may have it mixed up, it may not be McDonald's and Burger King, but it was a couple of fast food restaurants that they were pressuring here to. And brings up a question. What's wrong with eating meat that is sacrificed to other gods?
You're opening the door for Satan.
And you'll remember in the book of Acts that one thing that there were a couple things that the early church, said that when the circumcision come up and everything, they said, okay, we understand that the Gentiles don't need to be circumcised, but they said two things. They said, and one of those things was to not eat meat sacrificed to animals. I know Paul did a write-up in one of his letters talking about how that, it didn't mean anything, but still it was a requirement among the early church not to eat anything sacred. And then you go over into the book of Revelation, and it talks about not eating, things that are sacrificed to other gods, to pagan gods. So I would say that still holds true, And if I see something that's labeled halal, Raymond's not going to buy it, Not because I believe not because I just want to honor the God that I serve, And because when we sit down at the table, we dedicate and say a blessing over that food, expecting God to bless that food, but that's the God that I serve. And so, that's right. Anyway, this food that's going to be provided to these young men was coming from the king's diet, coming from the king's table, and it was all sacrificed to their God. Scripture tells us that he's going to nourish them for 3 years. Now, this is the college. I mean, this is what we would call today a 3-year college for these young men that come in. And remember last week we talked about that Daniel and these young men are between the ages of 12 and 14 years old. I mean, at best, I heard David Jeremiah, I believe it was one day, when I was listening to him talk about Daniel being 14 years old, brought in. But that's what that word children, according to the people that know a lot more about Hebrew than I do, they say that that's what it means, someone between the ages of 12 and 14. So these young men are brought into a very difficult situation, and they're sending them to school. They're sending them to college. 3 years, a 3-year college, and they're supposed to learn all of the culture and the languages and everything. And believe me, from what I've read, there was a whole lot that they had to learn. There was at least 4 languages, or at least 3 languages besides their language that they were going to have to learn. Or maybe it's 3 altogether. Hebrew, they knew Hebrew, Aramaic, Akkadian, I guess it was 3. Well, they were going to have to learn 2 other languages besides the language that they knew. Not only that, they were going to have to learn all about astronomy and the mathematics and all that. We went over a big list that things that come out of Babylon that had been part of the science program there. After the 3-year period, we understand that these 3 children, and if they were 14 years old when they were taken and brought into Babylon, they'd be about 17 years old when they completed their training program. Then the testing was that they had to appear before the king, and he was the one that gave them the test. He was the one that tested them. Now, believe me, it was important that they passed the test when they appeared before the king. What about being an educator in that period of time? Those that were responsible for training these young men. Because, see, it's not like it is today. I understand that sometimes an educator, it's hard to remove them from the job if they're not doing a good job. In fact, I heard that there was some in New York that had been not doing a good job, and there've been complaints, and so what they did was they just put them. The guys would just go to a room every day and sit in that room all day long because they couldn't fire them because of the union and all of that. So they've been doing that for several years, just sitting in that room. Some of the teachers that had a complaint against them and removed them from teaching, But that's not the way it was here in Babylon. A lot of bad things could happen to you if you were an educator and that student didn't pass the test when he appeared before the king, you know. So it was important, and that's why when we're looking at this part of Daniel, that's why it's important to understand how this situation is not just a mediocre run-of-the-mill saying, I don't want to eat what you put on the table, you know. This carries a lot of danger to it. Not only to the educator, but to those that are going to Daniel and his friend who are going to refuse to eat from the king's table. Bearing that in mind. But if these students look bad when they appeared before the king, or if they couldn't pass that test, it might mean a person loses their head. And believe me, that part of the world is a part of the world that believes in taking the head off. You know, we've learned that. I mean, you know, we wouldn't have thought that 40 years ago, but that's the way it is right now. Life is cheap, and it didn't take. And Nebuchadnezzar was a cruel man. Remember King Zedekiah, you know. If Zedekiah and his household had left Jerusalem and went out and surrendered to Babylon, that's what the prophet Jeremiah told him. If you just go out and surrender, everything will be okay with you. But instead, Zedekiah and his household, they tried to flee, and they caught him in the plains of Jericho. Babylon did, the armies of Babylon. I caught them down there, and they took them to Ridloff where Nebuchadnezzar was. And what happened then was that he took and lined Zedekiah's sons up and killed them, all while Zedekiah was watching. And then he plucked his eyes out, blinded him. And, you know, we talked about a prophecy that by Isaiah that had been earlier that had said that Zedekiah would not see Babylon. And you could take that to mean, well, he's never going to be taken to Babylon. That's not what it meant. It meant that they even never see Babylon because he would be blinded. And it was kind of confusing because it said he'd never see Babylon, yet he's going to Babylon, you know. So. And that was about, if I remember correctly, that was several years before the situation ever developed. And then we have this guy that's in charge of all these young men. His name is Ashkenaz. And I was looking at one commentary, and it says that his name means, I will make prominent the sprinkle. I have no idea. What that's referring to. I thought about it. Maybe it's that maybe he likes the Methodists, or, you know. I'm just kidding. I have no idea what that means, but I thought it was just kind of interesting that the guy's name would mean that he would make prominent the sprinkle. And I just threw that in. Now, at this point, Ashkenaz is going to rename these children, these young men. We think about it. Have you ever noticed in the Bible how many times that somebody's name gets changed? Did you know that we're going to have a different name, or we're going to, yeah. You take one of the interesting things is that Joseph's name was changed, Moses, you know, but one of the interesting things is Abraham and Sarah, the changing of their name. And what the Lord did himself with Abraham and Sarah, you know, was that he took and inserted a fifth letter into, and remember we talked about grace being the number 5. But he inserted the letter K, and it's pronounced kind of like a, and it's taken to mean in itself as it stands by itself, the Spirit. And if you look at Abram now become Abraham because he inserted a letter or that signifies the Spirit into his. And then he comes to Sarah and he does the same thing. The fifth letter in her name becomes the A. Sarah. And so by doing the same thing, the fifth letter of the Hebrew alphabet is taken and put into their name. God, and to me it says that, look, God says, all right, you were something before, but I'm putting the Spirit into your name. And you're not going to be just Abraham, the father. You're going to be the father of many nations, And then we find that, many of the people of God have had their name changed, as they serve God. And that's what this is all about. Most especially when a nation conquered some other nation, they like to change their name to represent some of their gods. I'll show you something in just a minute about that. So they're going to give them a new name. Let's look at those names. Now Daniel, in his Hebrew name, means God is just. But Belshazzar means, may Bel protect his life. Now Bel is just another word for Baal, the Phoenician god. It says, and some of these gods are all the same. It's just their names kind of got changed through the different cultures in the Middle East. I'll show you one that ended up being changed to Allah in just a minute. And Hananiah is named it Jehovah is gracious, like that. But Shadrach means command of Aku. Now who's Aku? Aku is the moon god of ancient Babylon. And if you look at tradition and history, it's just one of those names that eventually gets named into Allah. There was another name, Sin, S-I-N, that ended up, that was moon god, So they just kind of got the names changed a little bit, but they represented the same thing. Then Mishael, his name meant, who is he that is God? Mishak, though, meant, who is what Aku is? So, there's that moon god again. Who is what the moon god is? Azariah, Jehovah has helped. Abednego means the servant of Nebo. Now, Nebo was considered to be the son of the Babylonian king Baal. So, just another one of those gods. So that you see how. Let's put the name of our God on these people so that Jehovah is not in the picture. Kind of like what's happening in our land today. Let's don't talk about Jesus. Let's put something else. Use something. Verse 8. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the princes of the eunuchs. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse like the children which are of your sort? Then shall you make me endanger my head to the king. So what we find, it was a kind of a touchy situation, that they. But here's the thing that stands out. The Bible says that Daniel purposed. Now the word purpose is the word sum or seem. I guess we would say some, but it means to put in place, or to put, or place, or to set, or appoint. So what it's saying here, that some way in Daniel, he had set up or set in place that he was going to do his best not to defile himself and to serve God. That's a 14-year-old boy. Never too young to purpose that you're going to please God or serve God. Okay? And so that's what he done. He said, I'm going to serve God regardless of the circumstances. I'm going to do my best. Now, it wasn't all up to Daniel. I mean, he could say, I don't want to eat the king's meat. It's offered up to idols. I don't want to eat it, But he's in a land, a captive in a land, and he could have said, all of them could have said, well, what can I do? What can I do? Everybody's doing it. What can I do? I'm a captive, and but he observes, I'm going to do all in my power. I'm going to do my best, and not to defile myself. And so Daniel, that's what he done. He set the direction for his life. He decided that he's going to serve God, and it wasn't going to change. I want you to understand the situation that these young men are in. They're in a foreign land. They're away from their parents, their family. They're subject to a violent and a pagan people, and the many gods that they don't understand. And yet Daniel had purposed that he was going to live for God. That's saying a whole lot about the character of Daniel, isn't it? And the word that's in his heart. Heart is the Hebrew word. I guess it's spelled L-E-D, but I guess it's Ladi, or something like that. But it means the inner man. I mean, it is inside that he had determined that he wasn't going to define himself. Here's the real secret, I think. The first is to be honest or open to God. It's just be honest with God. In our weaknesses, be honest with God. And say, look, God, I want to serve you. I want to do what you want. I don't want to defile myself. And so, God, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to purpose to do my best, not to do anything. Then trust God, and then to be obedient to the best of your ability to serve God. And that's when God is able to step in and make changes that otherwise wouldn't happen. It's quite a thing to know that Daniel says to the prince of the eunuchs, I don't want to defile myself with this food from the table. And yet, to find out that he is able, that he's able to not do that, or at least to go through a test and not do that. We'll talk about the test a little bit tomorrow. My time is up. But anyway, it's kind of the character of Daniel that I'm trying to stress today. A young man that says, I want to serve God and not do the convenient thing. Sometimes it's easier to be and do the convenient thing. Go along, well, that's just the way things are. That's the way everybody's doing it. That's just what everybody, that's the law, you know. That's what, and that's what the ruler said. But sometimes, if you're going to please God, you're going to have to take a stand. You're going to have to take a stand. You have to say, and this is something you determine within. I am not going to defile my life by doing what someone else says is the proper thing to do. God bless you this morning. Let's go after him.